Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heathens and Fanatics, formerly known as Sacred Text Left to Right. I am Rabbi Howard Goldsmith, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Ira Eben. And today we have an interesting issue springing out of our Torah portion. Ira, would you please introduce the text and what we'll be discussing today?
So Howie, this coming week's portion is Parsha Tetzaveh, where it discusses what's called the Big Day Kahuna, the clothing of the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, the high priest and the simple priest. And there it talks about that the purpose of their clothing is l'chavod l'tifaret, to give honor and to give glory to the Kohanim. And really, what I want to discuss with you today, and I think the major distinction between the Reform and the Orthodox movement, is how we view Kohanim, and I guess, and Leviim, and the different statuses and different levels of Jews in Judaism, something that I know that the Reform movement sort of got rid of a number of years ago, but it still has a stature and a place in the Orthodox movement. So why don't I turn that over to you?
Okay, very good. Yes, as you point out, the Reform movement pretty much did away with the distinctions between different kinds of Jews. So in a traditional setting, there's Kohanim, priests, there's Leviim, the Levites, and then there's Yisrael. And the place where that is seen, I would say, most commonly, and a lot of my Reform congregants and Reform colleagues end up in a conservative synagogue or Orthodox synagogue for Shabbos, they'll notice that the first aliyah, the first Torah blessings around the reading of the Torah goes to somebody who's a Kohen, the second one to a Levite, and then the rest of them to everyone else. And so I'll have people come to me occasionally, congregants come to me and say, Rabbi, I think I'm a Levite. They need a Levite for my nephew's bar mitzvah. Am I a Levite? Can you write me a letter saying I'm a Levite so they can call me up? Something like that.
So you make them a Levite, is what you're saying.
I make them a Levite. Exactly.
Congratulations.
Usually their father was a Levite, their grandfather was a Levite, so it's not.
It works out.
Exactly. And the other place where we see that is, of course, around funerals and very particular rules around how Kohanim can be with the bodies of the deceased and in cemeteries, and there's very particular rules around that.
I'll expand on that, by the way, if I can add there also we have something called Birkat Kohanim, which is in English they call it Duchening, which is on the holidays. In Israel they do it every day, but in the diaspora we do it around the holidays, and the Kohanim are the ones who bless the people, and the Leviim, the Levites, are the ones who wash their hands as part of their ritual. So that also is a problem.
And what's even more interesting about that is that it became the custom in the Reform movement decades ago that the rabbi should do Birkat Kohanim, that same blessing, at the end of every service. And it's a very powerful moment within a Reform worship service. The way we do it actually in our family services, I think, is quite lovely, where the cantor sings one line of the Birkat Kohanim, and then I say it in English, and then we have the parents holding their children close to them, and they repeat it in English to their children. And it's this beautiful moment. It's very beautiful. Very meaningful.
Well, so the practice of the Birkat Kohanim, or specifically the verses, Yivarechacha Hashem Yishmerecha, that practice came for Friday night for Birkat Habanim, that parents bless their children with those blessings, and it's not done in a congregational setting, but it is one of the more beautiful parts of the week for me. And of course, you have the scene from Fiddler on the Roof, when he says, "May the Lord protect and defend you." We'll do our singing later, by the way.
We'll do our singing later, exactly. Yeah. And of course, it is in the Reform tradition as well that if you're having Shabbos at home, that you would also bless your children. I don't think it's done as much as people should. We do it every Friday night in our house. In any event, but beyond those things, really in the Reform movement, we've done away with the distinction. So people record it on naming certificates and on bar mitzvah certificates and on gravestones and on ketubot. But outside of that, we do not record. We make no distinction between Kohen, Levite, Israel.
Why do you think that is, Howie? Why do you think they got rid of it?
Because back in the late 19th century, when the Reform movement was being founded, one of the things that they were trying to do, as they were trying to make the religion more universal and less particularistic, was to do away with all things related to the priesthood. They said, we are no longer striving for the restoration of sacrifice. We're no longer looking to rebuild the temple. Instead, we are looking for a messianic age among all peoples with no concern for animal sacrifice. And therefore, if we're not looking to return to animal sacrifice, there is no need to remember who would do the sacrifices, were the sacrifices reinstated. Right. There's also, within that kind of universalistic perspective, a true commitment to equality among all people and among all Jews. So the notion of drawing distinctions between different kinds of Jews, particularly a hierarchical distinction, would have been anathema to those people who originally innovated the Reform movement. Now, that being said, there's a lot of things, a lot of ritual that has come back into the Reform movement that was originally done away with. Some of the baby that was thrown out with the bathwater, but this is not one of them. That distinction has not come back into the Reform movement because of our continued, because I think two reasons. First of all, our continued commitment to equality among all Jews, and second, because we do not seek the restoration of animal sacrifice.
So in the Orthodox movement, we have three crowns, as it's referred to in the Pirkei Avot. There is the crown of Torah, there is the crown of Kohuna, and there is the crown of Malchut, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of Malchiot, which is the crown of monarchy. And what we have these things, we maintain them as much as possible, I think for two reasons as well. Number one is that the Torah is a 3,000-year-old document, plus 3,500-year-old document, and which is phenomenal. And so therefore we try to preserve it as much as we possibly can, even without the temple in existence today. But the other part, which is something that you refer to, is the importance of preserving this for the idea for the future, is that we believe that there will be a time where, in Messianic times, which again, we all strive for, and there are two aspects of Messianic times. One is the aspect for the world, of a utopian on the world, and the other is the aspect of service that goes back to the time of biblical times, which is something that we don't fully relate to today, but I would imagine that when it happens, we would relate to it again. And therefore, we have the impetus upon us to preserve Kohanim, the status of Kohanim, as well as the status of, reminding ourselves the idea of the Melech HaMashiach, which is the hopes of the Davidic dynasty continuing down the line from the time of King David for the next one to be the King Messiah for the Messianic times. There is one other aspect of this, and that is that in Leviticus it has the mitzvah, in Parshat Emor, it has the mitzvah of V'kerashtem, where everybody is obligated to give honor to the Kohanim, just as it was 3,300 years ago when the Torah was given. So we have to give a higher status. They get the first aliyah. We ask them to lead Birkat Hamazon. We're not allowed, according to the Torah, to give them menial tasks. And actually, it's a mitzvah to do things for them. And we keep that status, A, because it's in the Torah, and B, because someday, please God, soon, we'll see that role come again in prominence in Messianic times.
One of the real problems with the notion of the reestablishment of animal sacrifice is that it would put us out of a job, Ira.
Yeah. So that's a valid point, except Maimonides disagrees. Maimonides says, what Howie's saying is that traditionally the priests, the Kohanim, took the role of the clergy, right? So I always found that was cool, the story of Hanukkah, that the story of Hanukkah, the Hashmonaim family were Kohanim, right? So we see them as military people. They were rabbis, right? Rabbis can be big and strong and warriors. Like us, absolutely. Just like you could see this. That's why we have the video, just to see our warriors fan. But Maimonides writes that that even though they had the place and the role in the temple, it tells us specifically that everybody has the opportunity for the crown of Torah, and everybody has an opportunity, if they'd like, to be leaders in teaching Torah and in the spiritual leaders of the people outside the temple. And that it was a responsibility. He teaches this in Hilchot Trumot Maser, if I'm not mistaken, that if that's the case, then just like there was a responsibility of the community to support the Kohanim and Leviim, who were the clergy, it was a responsibility to support the individual Israelites who were clergy as well.
Well, I'll tell you,
that's why we get paid.
I'll tell you what I like about this disagreement or this difference, I would say. I think that it actually pulls on both of us. I think that it pulled the notions that you're discussing, particularly around preservation of Torah for its own sake, and traditions that may be mysterious to us, that we may not fully understand, as a way to hope for a better future, I think that that's something that the Reform movement can learn from the modern Orthodox world. And my hope is that the Reform movement's really commitment to the notion that we shall be a kingdom of priests, that all of us have within us that special sanctity and holiness, striving for more and more equality and justice within our community, and then also, God willing, outside of it. I think that that's something that the Orthodox world could stand to reflect on as well. And so I see this as an opportunity for us looking to one another.
I hear you. It just doesn't go with the heathens and the fanatics theme, but I think it is important that we do recognize there's a great deal that we do agree upon, especially the idea of a mamlechet kohanim, as it's said in the Torah, to be a kingdom of priests, and that every Jew has a responsibility to bring God's light into the world, not just the kohanim, the priests of the temple. And at the same time, I think it's important that all of us recognize especially in the times that we live in, the important role we take in preserving what the ancient and bringing it into modern times. Chadesh Shemenu Kekedem. We pray that our new days should be like old, and if we hope for the Torah to be relevant in the next 3,300 years, then we better do our best to preserve it as best as possible.
Wonderful. Ira, thank you so much.
We have a great trip in Israel.
Thank you very much. Safe travels to you as well.
Thank you. We'll be off next week, and we'll return with heathens and fanatics / sacred text left to right in a few weeks. For all our listening audience, shalom.
Shalom indeed.